every morning, marmalade on toast, 2 cups of
Marmalade.
coffee. Yeah, homemade
Yeah.
marmalade.
I think I might have had your homemade marmalade.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
good.
it's very good. Yeah. You still put whiskey in it? No. Oh,
No,
no.
not in
That's
the
my
mornings,
father-in-law.
Auntie. And so I had a question for you about climate, drying
Yep.
climate, because what we do is very dry. How relevant is that to Kiwi?
So New Zealand has quite a range of climatic conditions. So we're a small country, we stretch. So from the north, which is subtropical, and quite wet and quite warm, and we can start to grow bananas and tropical fruits and papayas and things like that, down to the South Island, which is alpine, cold, places like Christchurch, which are actually can be really, really arid in the summer months. So yeah, there's quite a diversity of climatic situations, and water is an issue that even in Auckland, where we have quite a sort of relatively subtropical climate, we were on water restrictions last year.
Okay.
Because our supply is a little bit sloppily managed. So so
but weather conditions, are they drying? Is it a drying climate in New Zealand?
Raining and drying, so we're having both things, both extremes happening. So we have
massive stormy rains,
big lovely smashing rains, but Auckland's always been quite smashy, rainy, kind of little bit of that kind of rainforest, our subtropical kind of rainforest vibe. West coast of New Zealand, lots of really beautiful rainforest, and then the east coast tends to be the drier coast.
Okay, and so the beautiful rainforest is not suffering from a drying climate, though. It's not like a way it's going.
It is definitely, there are shifts happening, and everybody is watching closely what's happening in the natural ecology, the remnants of it. So the areas that are left are very beautiful, but that it's actually, in terms of the percentage of New Zealand that has remnant bush, it's actually quite small.
Just a lot of a massive part of our practice is working in the dry. So I guess that'd be a fair part of the talk is about that kind of the dealing with dry. And so anyone kind of north of us, Northern Europe, they're really interested. We're kind of on the forefront of the drying climate. And people are sort of copying what's happening in the Mediterranean region and taking it further north.
I think for in purposes of understanding an arid climate, the way water works in a garden, I think, is relevant to everyone as well. So even when you do have more water, how you manage water and how you understand the reservoir of water in your gardens is relevant wherever you're working. And especially if you don't want to be the kind of depending on irrigation systems, because even in Auckland, our Februaries are always dry, and how we manage those is really important. If you throw a whole lot of water on a climate that's drying out, in that heat, what we find is that we get a huge amount of fungal diseases and things, and that in that dry period, you actually need to pull back on the watering for people, like pull back on the watering and actually let the plants dry out as well. So I think what you're going to be talking about is going to be relevant for everyone.
That, And is irrigation, do most gardens have irrigation in them then?
Not if I can help it, but they're pretty, everybody loves to flick a switch, right? Ideally on their phone. So and it also depends on people's lifestyles, everyone's like, and the issue we have in New Zealand is a lot of people are going away for the summer when the gardens are at the driest, and so they're all like, yay, I'm off, and that's when the gardens need the water, so they're not available to water. So we try to sort of look at the way those might be managed, but I think views are changing too, because we had some really heavy water restrictions, so generally most clients are keen to put in water tanks these days. So
good.
It's very good. Well, we're clicking over to the 7:30 mark, but we'll wait and see. Got 52 people in the room now, so we can sort of probably have some other so just as everyone knows, I'll do a proper welcome once we get to the 7:30 time, but just so you know, there is a question and answer column down the bottom, and that James will be answering questions at the end, but just as they come up during the talk, feel free to put up any thoughts or ideas or comments. We can see them all streaming up and down. So it's really nice if we can see those as they go. And then at the end, we'll just sort of look through them and take it from there.
And a little heads up, I don't know anything about roses or any issues with your formiums. I'm no garden doctor.
Yeah, James is very sensitive about roses. So I'm
under
strict instructions to not mention the rose, which is making me feel a bit uncomfortable now because I'm saying rose quite a lot. And I'm a little bit nervous he might just lose it, but I'll stop.
Actually, we are introducing quite a lot of roses into our gardens now, but not the roses that people expect. So it's just, but it's definitely in the landscapes around us, there's loads of roses growing.
Now everybody's going to want to know what roses you're introducing. Because this is interesting too, because when I've gone walking with you in the area behind where you practice, there's amazing wild roses. And I think that was like evidence to me that roses do not need to be treated like princesses.
Exactly. The problem is you find mostly princesses in the nursery, so you have to sort of go digging to find really good, wild, tough roses, and then they look really rubbish in the middle of the summer. So you still have to accept that short flowering period and that sort of tough but beautiful 1D look. So we're kind of really into them, but not the roses that everyone will ask questions about. Yeah.
Just to hide them in the back somewhere, so they flash out and disappear, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Very nice, very nice. Right, so how we are going? Well, we've got 75 people in the room, so I think maybe we could sort of talk about starting now.
Yep.
So, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, ko Xanthi White tēnei. It's really, really exciting to have you guys all here. Thank you for putting up with James and I having a little kind of geeky plant chat at the beginning of this talk. This is super exciting for the Society because this is our first live event. It's going straight to YouTube, but we're also going to be keeping a record of it in our archive. So it's going to be available for us in the future, which is pretty cool. I've mentioned through our chat that there's going to be there's question and answers. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you've got a little Q&A thing there. Keep those questions coming through the talk. Just because we don't answer them doesn't mean that we're not interested in your questions. We're going to do all of that at the end, and we're going to try and gather them together. So feel free. Oh, there came a question. That's cool. We like that. So we're really excited about that. So keep doing that. That's really great. I'm really delighted to introduce you all to James Basson. I first met James in Nagasaki in Japan, where we were both working at a place called Haus ten Bosch, which was a spectacle in itself. And we were really part of that spectacle for everyone that's there, but it also included like sort of massive fireworks displays and pirate ships. There were pirate ships and red carpets and Van Gogh exhibitions and all these things kind of swirling around. So it's kind of like being on those reality TV shows where they put everybody on an island and you either like end up kind of killing someone or being like loyal comrades. So fortunately, James and I ended up in the loyal comrades group and had the pleasure of exhibiting in other places around the world together. And when you're working in those situations, having friends, and one of the most wonderful things about that is the enrichment that you get from that, sharing ideas and having conversations about landscape and horticulture and thinking. James's garden at that event was had these huge concrete walls contrasted with kind of really beautiful horticultural soft plantings and pools and ponds. But it also had a massive ballistic missile hole through the center of these walls, like massive, like big smashed out holes. And that's the bit that I particularly liked about the work. And it was it's something that I've always enjoyed about James's work is the thinking that sits beneath each concept. So you've got the beauty of the surf is anchored in a design process that is deliberate and well-researched and explorative as well as intuitive. And I think that this is something that we all seek in our work, to be in tune with the sort of subtle beauty of the natural world and at the same time to reach into our imagination and find the undiscovered or unexplored. James could actually fill up like a couple of buckets of all his gold and silver and floral kind of awards that he's run around the ward. A couple of buckets, do you reckon, or 3 buckets? Maybe 4 buckets.
Yeah, probably just
bucket loads of awards.
You got a few, Xanthi. You got a few.
And and from like the coveted Chelsea Flower Show and these sorts of things. And while his practice is based in the south of France, he works in China and Russia and England and all over the place, America. So he's really well experienced with a range of landscapes. So we're really, really grateful, James, that you've been able to give us this time tonight and be with us. We're very sad that it's not in person, but we do hope that spending time together tonight, you're going to be keen to come down here and get down to that west coast and see that rainforest. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Xanthi. So I'll share my screen and just check that.
Yeah.
You have to, it's disabled, so just have to enable it. There you go. Yeah, still, James, I think we need to enable screen sharing.
I should have given you a countdown. Now,
sorry about that. It should
there
work
is a
now.
secret, James. For those of you who recently arrived, there's a secret James behind the scenes who's doing all the technical stuff. So James isn't actually talking to himself right now. He is legitimately just getting his screen
glad you
going.
clarified that.
So, I think it has to be a real sport. A real talk. There has to be some sort of technical glitches along. It just adds to the authenticity of the experience, just so they don't think that we, put it on earlier. This is live, guys. We're not faking it.
Yeah, I am the proof.
Yeah. This is a live slideshow.
So we, as Xanthi said, we have a practice in the south of France in the Mediterranean. We've been working there since 2000, and we're a very small company, family run. Me and my wife, Helen, now has moved on to do landscape archaeology. And so we're a small practice working in a very dry, barren climate full of people who want very colorful, bright, shiny gardens in the Côte d'Azur. So we came across very early on a real challenge to create gardens that satisfied very wealthy clients who wanted everything they could afford in a very mean, tough climate. And when you think Provence, you think of lavender fields and lots of big, lush, well, not lush, but kind of big, bloomy gardens. And in fact, when you get to the summer, when your clients turn up, they're all brown and dead. So a huge part of our practice is persuading clients that brown is beautiful. So most of my work, most of our work is inspired by the natural landscape. And I'm going to talk you through the process we went through to do one of my most recent jobs that we're still working on. You can just see a chateau in the top left-hand corner, and on the other side of the road, there's this place called La Clappe, and it's the driest part of France. There's very little organic material. It's pretty much all stones. And the vegetation has evolved into a fire turbulent landscape. It's just burnt again. Every 15 or so years it burns and then regenerates. And there's an extraordinary biodiversity, an extraordinary amount of green midsummer, an extraordinary kind of atmosphere. And that atmosphere is what we try and bring into the gardens, and then layer in another load of Mediterranean species, which sort of bring a bit more color, a bit more interest into the landscapes. That's what the soil looks like. So we're working in very mean situation, but mean for us means low potential. Low potential for us means no weeds, no fight, no war. In fact, the tougher the garden, the happier we are. And in this garden, we're very lucky because there was no soil, and all the foundations for the buildings were dug out of rock. That rock was crushed and then spread back across the ground. And so we're only planting in crushed rock, at least 50 centimeters deep of crushed rock, because we had in the first slide, this plant in the front there is Quercus coccifera, which is an oak which grows to about 1 meter tall and is an absolute winner in this environment. So we had to beat Quercus coccifera, and Quercus coccifera likes to be burnt, so it likes to be strimmed, cut down to the ground, and grows back. And so our big weed issue in that kind of soil was this very tough oak. And our solution, and it was a big gamble, was to bury it in 50 centimeters of hardcore crushed rock. And we're in year 2, and so far it's not come back. So we're hoping we solve that problem. These landscapes are kind of a patchwork of agricultural and very, couldn't say it's wild because it's all pretty much grazed, but very, in French, rude, which means brutal landscapes, where all the shrubs kind of grow into tight balls because it's so dry and so windy and so bright that they kind of protect themselves. And then these very extraordinary vineyards growing again in rock, but bright green midsummer. So for us, to satisfy our clients who want a very bright and kind of wonderful feeling landscape midsummer, we really look towards these landscapes to see what does without irrigation. Our practice doesn't allow any irrigation, so it's quite limited how many clients we get a year, because it's a challenge. Most people want irrigation, they want to work against nature, but it's absolutely our rule of thumb that we won't work with anyone who wants irrigation. So we don't do lawns. You'll see a couple, because of course there's always a compromise, but pretty much 80% of our work is zero irrigation with a couple of lawns stuck in there to keep the Brits happy. So this is the kind of vegetation that we look at. This is all the wild vegetation. So there's quite a few prickly things, but things like pines and junipers, rosemaries, phylloreas, they all stay very green midsummer, so very useful for us. You get this kind of patchwork of brown and green, and for us, as soon as we start playing with that patchwork and creating a pattern with that patchwork, suddenly there's a potentially a readable landscape. Of course, when you look into wild landscapes, they're quite scary for lots of people because they're so messy. And we really try and fight the mess. I am an extremely messy person. And so I am fighting my own nature and to create gardens that have a more of a readable quality. Also, I'm an absolute plant obsessive, so I keep putting too many species in my gardens. Therefore, they are quite messy. So I play in this world. I'm trying to make that landscape tidier. More vegetation. This is more the kind of, wouldn't really call it prairie. It's like a steppe landscape. Again, super poor soil, small grasses and herbaceous plants that all brown off in the summer. So then we're going for the gold, going for that gold color and trying to keep it in such a way that it maintains a sort of a quality that people can appreciate. Lay it in with some plants like asters, fennels that will flower through the summer or in early autumn. But you can see from that plant palette that it's not a great selling point for most of our clients. Most of them look at that and go, wow, that's a bit tough, a bit mean, or I want something a bit lusher. On the bottom right-hand corner, you see moss. I'm sure in New Zealand, you're used to working with moss, or you certainly see it in your landscape, especially in the wetter areas. But in a very dry Mediterranean landscape, moss is everywhere. Moss is a dry garden plant. And it's not something that I had understood until I started walking landscape, looking at landscape and seeing in the autumn this kind of gold green that flushes up under all the dead brown stuff. And so your landscape changes from this kind of taupey, browny, dull quality crossed over this gold grass look until this bright green flashes up, because the first rains, everything goes bright green. It's something we are learning to introduce into gardens. Of course, it'll take 10 years or maybe more before it really takes into the gardens, but putting down the right mineral material, which is quite absorbent, and a certain amount of organic matter to allow the moss to evolve and create this sort of underscore of green in the autumn. We really fight the great battle of planting distances. And when we lay out our gardens, which you'll see later on, we're really against that safe distance behavior. We like plants to touch each other and to grow over each other and through each other. And when we prune, we don't prune between the plants. We like them to become like one kind of social mass. We're really into the sort of social experience that plants generate by growing amongst each other. Of course, if you've been practicing for a long time, you know that. You look at the landscape, you see that. But actually, when you look at most planting plans, most planting layouts, there's a safe distance. And our clients are constantly saying to us, aren't those plants planted too close together? Because they've read the RHS manual on how to plant plants. And so for us, it's one of our biggest tricks, potentially, to make wild looking landscapes, natural looking landscapes, is war, because nature is war or love, as you want to describe it, but it's definitely this social interaction. So this is the site soil. This is actually just outside. So we had this extraordinary color play between the red ochre soil, which was mixed into this very whitey gray stone material. So that's, again, something we would be looking at. We look at the vegetation, but we also look at the mineral quality of a landscape. And it's such an important part of the visual aspect of our gardens. There's so much mineral. The mineral is the space. The mineral is the air and the breath in our plantings. A bit like a lawn, maybe the space in a garden. For us, it's these mineral kind of airy moments between our vegetation. So for us, it's very important, that mineral quality. This was the site about a year ago. And you can see just the Quercus coccifera, this root on the top layer. And it's got this kind of bulbous root that if we could, we removed, because otherwise we were really having trouble maintaining it. And then you can see we've got like 5 centimeters of organic material and about 10 to 15 centimeters of clayey, stony material, and then move into kind of fractured rock. So that was our potential for the garden. And in fact, we wanted to lower the potential even more and bury it under 50 centimeters of just crushed rock to get it really, really poor. Poor landscapes for us also means very little pruning, very little weeding, very little gardening in the slavery of gardening sense, much more about selective weeding and sculptural pruning, but not things you have to do because otherwise the thing takes over. Make it super poor and then enjoy gardening is our motto. I'm a bit of a geek, and I keep evolving this spreadsheet and making it bigger and bigger and more complicated. And I spend a lot of time filling in the gaps in my spreadsheet. I use this to keep my mind open, to stop myself kind of using the same plants that are in my head. It's very easy for us to get comfortable with the vegetation that we practice with, and then forget all that other vegetation that we could be using. And so I work in a very kind of left brain, right, left brain process, where it's really a mathematical juggling of numbers. So how many months dry is the garden? 6 months, 9 months, 3 months? How long, when is the client going to be using the garden? And I just pare down the list until I get to hopefully less than 200 species. Then I try and pare that down again to maybe 60. And we try and keep a fairly high level of biodiversity in our plantings, because nothing flowers for very long in France, in the south, in the Mediterranean. And so we really need a big diversity of flowering plants that will come and go throughout the season. And then this sort of backbone of stable evergreen structure, which gives the garden a kind of healthy and solid, stable feel. I understand most of you are professionals, and therefore I sort of go into a bit more detail about how we do our planting plans. Because we have a huge diversity of plants and we want to lay them out in a very natural way, we don't lay our plants out ourselves. We let a little bit of hazard and hopefully happy accident evolve in our work. And that has led to quite a few disasters and some extraordinary wins. And so for us, the extraordinary wins are worth the disasters, and our clients are generally understanding of our practice and our ways. Mostly they're nowadays understanding because we stay involved with our gardeners for at least 10 years. So we've changed our whole practice. I'm not a born gardener, I'm a born landscape painter or something. So I haven't got that itch to weed or prune. And so I missed the point about how important maintenance was. So I'll just drink. So I met a young man called Alejandro, who is an extraordinary gardener, and he's got the itch. And together we've been maintaining, and also another great skill of Ali's is maintaining a good relationship with clients. Often I can get a bit brassic and a bit kind of single track minded and run with something which maybe the client is not so comfortable with, and Ali's got this great touch and the people really enjoy the time they spend with him. And we have developed this practice of a feedback loop. And so we have this huge spreadsheet which is showing us what plants we can plant, and then over the years we're feeding back into that spreadsheet all the things we learn from our gardens, the disasters, the successes. And that feedback loop is extremely rewarding for our clients. And so the messy gardens we made become better and better over time. So, great gardens are not made by designers, they're made by gardeners. So all of you garden designers out there who are not doing this, I recommend it, and landscape architects as well. I think it's the only way to learn. I've been throwing out gardens for the last 20 years and haven't really learned as much as I should have done. So this last 5 years, I've learned so much more by spending more and more time in the gardens that we've made. And that feedback loop is an extraordinary practice. And it also means we don't need so much work. England is producing 200 garden designers a year, and we're not getting as much work to feed that back. But if all those garden designers were also practicing a kind of support mechanism for the gardens they'd make, they wouldn't need so much work, and it would be a much more rewarding practice, I think, for most garden designers. So this is how we do our planting plans or planting lists. We sort of decide what the value of that plant is. Is that plant a structural plant, so something which is going to be there all year round? So it has to be at least 9 months green and looking well. I have a ground cover plant. So these ground cover plants, potentially they're not the most decorative plants, but they have to be very reliable, very not aggressive, very social. They have to be able to deal with, as the garden grows, they have to be able to deal with vegetation crowding it, and it has to be able to push out from the sides or deal with the shade. But it's the vegetation layer that really helps us sort of demineralize our landscapes. Initially, they look like deserts, all gravel and no plants. And slowly but surely, the faster vegetation grows up. The slow vegetation, things like the lentisk, Pistachia lentiscus, that might take 5 years to get to its right size because we plant everything really small. So we need something which is going to grab the ground and look well and make the client fairly happy and for 5 years, which is quite a demand for a fair amount of our clients who can afford to plant bigger. Then we have a design layer, and that's plants that will flower for at least 3 months of the year. something that plants that will give a real kind of the color, the wow factor in our planting design. And then all these plants need to be socially responsible. They need to all work together. Of course, we fail mostly on that. But now with this feedback loop, we learn more and more. And I think fail fast, fail forward, as some famous person has said recently. And I think that's what we try and do. But before, I think we were failing fast and not failing forward because we weren't learning from our mistakes. Now we really do. Then we give a percentage. So what we spend a lot of time looking at landscape and decide what percentage of ground cover or structural vegetation or kind of eventful design layer vegetation there is in a natural landscape, and then try and reapply that into our design. Often the dominant vegetation is something quite boring, but looking really well, like a lawn, but for us it's like a shrub layer. And then there's lots of things happen over the year. So we go back and back and back to the same landscape to see how that landscape evolves throughout the year. Then we decide how many plants we need per square meter. Again, that may not be as in the catalog. A catalog might say you need 1 plant per square meter, but we might put 3 because we want a little bit of war. We plant small, so our clients need to see the gardens evolve a bit quicker because we can only ask so much from them. And 2, we don't mind a bit of death. Nature, there's a whole lot of competition, and competition can lead to death, and that's not such a bad thing, and sometimes very beautiful. And so we're really we kind of put a mix in which will evolve and change. And I think the most exciting thing about our practice at the moment, where we are today, is talking about change, talking to our clients and saying, this is what it looks like day 1 or year 1, but by year 10, it's a totally different landscape, a totally different garden. We're not painting a picture, which has got to look like that for the rest of its time. We're starting a process, and that process is going to evolve. And the joy of the garden is watching the process evolve, not this pretty picture that James painted to them 10 years ago, but actually what it becomes. And what's brilliant about the feedback loop is we learn to see how that will evolve. So of course we get it wrong. There's no way we know what's going to look like in 10 years. We can have a good guess, but that uncertainty is the beauty, and that change is the beauty. So we really celebrate now that change in landscapes, and our clients, of course, getting super excited about that. It's just because generally we weren't talking like that. People thought, oh, we want to, Scape Design garden, it's going to look really pretty for the rest of its life. Well, maybe, but it's going to certainly change, and that's what's really exciting. That's what we love. As I showed you in the first photos of the landscape, we generally break our vegetation into shrub landscapes and stepic kind of grassy landscapes. So we've got this pattern, the landscape pattern that we use again and again is this sort of cross between the kind of bally, shrubby landscapes and then this more herbaceous grass-based landscapes. On a bigger scale, so this project, there's 44 villas and a hotel. We don't do projects like that. Mostly we do privately owned homes and do quite small plantings really. But this one was really big and extraordinary clients who were very brave, and they sold the whole project to the developers because we were working with a list of vegetation that was either inspired by or actually taken by seed from the landscape next door. So they were selling this very sound environmental practice landscape, which helped them get the project because they weren't really allowed. There was no irrigation allowed. They were changing a pine forest into a shrubby landscape, which actually is a totally sound practice because that's what happens when it burns. Of course, the Mediterranean, the big problem in the Mediterranean, as in Australia, is that they don't burn enough anymore. And so people have these homes in these aging forests, and those aging forests want to burn. They're made to burn, and that is the character of a Mediterranean landscape. And so now, because of this lack of burning, by removing the forest and replanting a shrub landscape, it's like taking that step, that environmental step. Of course, we're going to prevent the pines from taking hold again. Otherwise, at some point, the whole domain will burn and my client will not be very happy. So I just wanted to show you this spreadsheet because we've been working with Helena Coates, who's working with us at the moment, and she's a real data analyst, and data can be beautiful even for plant geeks like me. And that data pattern allowed us to, the problem a lot with these matrix plantings that you drop across a landscape is that they end up being copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste across the whole garden. That's not actually that interesting. And if you walk through a landscape, as the landscape rises, the vegetation changes. As it dips, it changes again. As it's facing east, facing west, it changes again. And that evolution of a landscape is really exciting. That kind of the pattern and flow of a landscape as you walk through it. So there's that temporal nature of passing through landscape, which we try to apply to this garden, this domain. We did that by taking our design layer, the shrub layer. There's often when you walk through a landscape, there's this dominant vegetation which is crossing through the whole thing, and it's getting higher and lower percentages across the landscape. And then you get this mix of more dynamic plants, more sensitive plants to aspect or soil humidity that will evolve and change. And so we didn't have all that data. And if we did have all that data, we'd have tried. And we really want to try that, which is sort of really analyze the site to the point where our vegetation evolves and changes relative to the site's aspect or soil moisture or organic matter changes in the landscape. But plants are flexible and plants are clever and they go where they are happiest. And so if you give enough potential to a site that allows the plants you've chosen to self-seed, evolve, and travel within your garden, bit by bit over the 10 years when we're at least following the garden, that garden will change and the vegetation will evolve. And if you put enough in, the landscapes become that more natural progression following the moisture or whatever it is. So in this garden, we took, I think it's 5 different species. And then as you can see, those green bands dropping down the table. So we'd overlap each time one species, one species, one species, till by the time you got to the last band in the landscape, which I think you can see the pattern there. So that's the villas. And this is our bands crossing the landscape. This is our typical planting plan, which gets broken down into little areas. So this is one villa, and you can see band B and band A. So band B1 has one mix of vegetation, but it gets to band B3, it's jumped 2 species, which you can just about work out on the right-hand side. So that there's things you can see in the start of the garden, which you can see by the end of the garden, but new things that have occurred. And by the time you cross the whole domain, then there's this echo and slight repeat of vegetation, but never exactly the same. So there's this constant change. And for us, change is everything. Our practice working with landscape, it's all about change, and it's our real our real original material. In architecture, but most architects is working against change, trying to restrain change, and actually we can celebrate change. So I think it's a very exciting for us evolution of our understanding of how we practice. So we throw in a bit more color. So to seduce our clients, we put pictures like this and less of the first ones. So this is vegetation that either is growing naturally in the landscape just behind La Clap, or vegetation that's growing in similar areas like southern Spain, Turkey, Greece. So different Mediterranean vegetations, which will just bring a little bit more color at different times of year. So that's the kind of shrubby mix, the plants that are sort of evergreen and will flower at some moment, but we would call that mostly our design layer, plants that will flower for 2 to 3 months a year. But we choose them also for their structure, their visual quality. So we've got some upright plants mixed with some kind of round, kind of pebbly looking plants, and then some sort of more feathery plants. We play with the texture and tone of the vegetation as much as the flowering. Of course, flowers sell. So in most of our pictures, we put the flowers, which is cheating for sure. Our next sort of study, and we want to work with some photographers. Been really lucky to work with some brilliant photographers, and we want to go back into our gardens with them, because photographers have this great eye. They see it differently to you, and we want to get the photographers come in midsummer and hopefully take photographs midday. So it's the worst time, not that golden hour where everything is kind of sparkly and wonderful and garden porn. We actually want to sell that. We want to understand and read the landscape and our plantings in the worst, toughest time of year, to understand how to blend those tones, which a photographer does extraordinarily well. They look at things from different angles to create gardens that have got a real sense of aesthetic in the toughest times. It's very easy in the spring to make them look pretty. There's lots of flowers. So that's the herbaceous and grassy mix for this particular project. There's lots more species, but this gave the clients enough understanding of the kind of vegetation we put in. Also looking at things like ferula, which is sort of bottom right one up, plants that are emergent. So plants, we have this sort of quite stable shrub landscape, the design layer, which is pretty much flowering for 3 months a year at least, and the ground cover layer. And then we have this emergent layer, these things that like pop up and kind of extravagant for maybe only 1 or 2 weeks. Asphodels and ferulas being two of my favorites. So this was planting on site. So this is the crushed hardcore. So it's very sandy. There was lots of fines. So the humidity you can see was held for a bit in this soil. It wasn't just pure gravel, but there was no organic matter. And we had this big debate with the local landscaper who was going to put the garden in, who said it wouldn't work and it would all die. Fortunately, it was supported by Olivier Philippi. If you haven't heard of him, you should look at his website. It's called jardinsec.com, drygardens.com in French. And he really helps us understand what will work. And he's been practicing for 20 years, planting and collecting seeds from all over the Mediterranean. It's got an extraordinary website. And so I was very confident that what we were going to do would work. I'm sure you do, but working with a team of people who really know their stuff really helps improve, your self-confidence about what is going to work and not. So this is his practice and the traditional practice of planting any plant in the Mediterranean and probably most around the world, but a really big hole, planting the plants at ground level, but with a big kind of dam of soil around that plant, so we can get 60 liters of water per plant, which is massive. But we only water once every 3 weeks for the first year, and then we never water again. And the whole plan, the whole kind of technique is to encourage plants to go down. So we water massively, we flood them, we drown them, but the soils are super draining, so it disappears within 5 minutes, and that water goes down deep and creates this big kind of moisture pocket deep in the soil, and the plants therefore follow that moisture and go down, so that hopefully within a year the roots are deep enough so they don't need watering again. Because if you dig deep enough, you'll find moisture, and lavenders and rosemaries will go down 20-30 meters, if not more, to find water. And so that's what we have to encourage, so that we don't have to water our gardens. All over the Mediterranean, people are using drip irrigation, and that drip irrigation drops little bits of water for 20 minutes or 5 minutes every day, and creates these little pockets of moisture 5 centimeters under the ground. One, most plants die of phytophthora, some sort of mold in the summer when it gets too warm. And two, if that irrigation stops, then all the plants die because they've been mothered for too long. So this is how we lay out our bed plants. This garden layout actually was, for me, a bit disappointing because it was so hard to manage the watering. We had to have these big ditches. Sometimes we collect the ditches, so we have 5 plants per ditch. But here, to deal with the slopes, to deal with the whole process, we had to have we have 40 to 50 centimeters apart each plant, so it was very regular. These ditches became this kind of lunar landscape of holes in the garden and impossible to walk through until the vegetation takes in the first year. But it allowed us to cover all the ground in a very simple and very clean process. And then the plant mix is what creates that dynamism. This is the Mediterranean. The man's hand on the Mediterranean has been to create agriculture or grazing. And the problem with that is most of our gardens actually are in quite quite fertile soils. So the landscapes have been fed and nourished and encouraged to grow things as well as possible. And we turn up and we want to create poor, barren, beautiful landscapes. And so actually our biggest challenge is to create really poor soil. And it's a big philosophical debate for us too, because to create poor soil, you need to bring in lots of mineral material, and bring in mineral material is lots of quarrying, lots of transport, lots of manipulation of a huge volume of foreign, even if it's very local material. And so our practice now is to kind of work harder and harder on the ground cover layer to try and reduce that mineral quality that we're bringing to our landscape, just because of the environmental costs of doing that. So there's a huge move towards making dry Mediterranean gardens, but there is potentially an environmental cost, and it's not irrigation, it's this mineral transport. And so it's our next challenge, because this low impact, low potential landscape, which is so beautiful, is generally in very, very tough landscapes. And actually, when you build a house in the south of France, you build it on old olive terraces or old flower growing terraces, and they're actually quite rich. So we've got this big debate at the moment, and it's where we're at, is to how to manage that richness so we can create these very low maintenance, very kind of pared back landscapes. Goats help, but we can't bring goats into gardens because they have no selective sense. They eat everything. But we have a whole series of different practices when it comes to pruning. This has been developed through Ali and our artist gardeners. We've kind of created this culture of gardeners that we are enjoying so much working with. And it's these people, if you've ever been to Chelsea or done a flower show, and it's those quirky people that come in the last week, and they're all natty dressers, and they've all come from some artistic background, but what they love is plants. And those people are underutilized. There's this extraordinary wealth of people who have got this real artistic temperament. They really need to garden, and they've got a real hand on it. And the problem is that garden designers are the bosses, and really it should be them. So we've been working with a whole bunch of goats, our artist gardeners, and it's them who decide how to prune the shrubs. It's them who decide which plants to weed out, which plants not to weed out. And it's them who make our gardens great. And that really needs to be communicated to our clients, so they pay people properly, because they don't need to be there so much time as a normal jobbing cleaning gardener. They have an ability to encourage a garden in a direction, and create a kind of philosophy to the approach of a garden, to the point where less time is needed, but they should be paid more. And so we have this great culture which is evolving, and of course that attracts brilliant people. So we've got this really wonderful community of gardeners now, and it's so rewarding for us. It's such a brilliant shared practice. The garden designer is no longer the boss. The client is no longer the boss. It's generally the gardener, because they're the ones that are always there. They're the ones that see the garden throughout the year. And so we learn so much from them. I wanted to show you how we start. So this is a classic landscape for us. This is actually in Provence, in Morsan-les-Alpilles, in the Alpilles area of Provence. And it was a football pitch for the kids. And that's our big battle. You know, if we don't do grass, where's Billy going to play football? Yeah, I don't really have a good answer for that. Cut the grass, let it go brown, and play on brown grass is generally the solution. Anyway, we changed that landscape into a garden through Design the Client, and this is how our plants arrive. So I want to just share that practice too, because I think it's very quick and technically a very nice solution. So we make these plant mixes. Each band is numbered with a surface area, and there's a quantity of plants per band. And so these are the plants that come from Olivier Philippi. They all come species by species. And then we make these plant mixes in the boxes to the point where we just drop each plant mix into each area. And then the gardeners spread them out and plant them. And the whole thing is, and so again, the gardener is the artist, the gardener is laying them out. We don't really want the gardener to worry too much about which species is next to which. We just have a kind of a rule of thumb, you know, 5, 3s, 2s, or these ones are singles. We really enjoy the idea of how plants grow is how you lay them out. So if a plant's a runner, it should be planted in kind of patches, groups. If a plant's a seeder, it potentially should be spotted. If plants have got heavy seeds, they're kind of in big lumps. There's this real kind of character of landscape which is relative to how it reproduces. And so we now, our rules of thumb are learning the lessons from how we observe plants in the wild. So that's those laying out of the bands. So our gardens initially look better out the ground than in, because once they go in, there's nothing to see. But you can see that kind of pattern across the landscape that we lay out. And then that's from above. So you can see that kind of pattern. So we've taken the complexity of all the vegetation, we put it into, this is 2 mixes across the landscape. And then you can, obviously, if you're in a drone, you can see the pattern. If you're in the garden, you just get this repeated kind of instance of vegetation, which helps you feel like you're in a, I wouldn't want our gardens to feel designed, but they feel like they are, there's a kind of a sense to them. Like when you walk in a landscape, there is a sense to what plants are growing. So this was very early on when that garden got planted. That was the following year. So actually the Mediterranean gardens grow actually pretty quickly. And the dynamic of Mediterranean plants has to be quick because it's going to burn soon. So plants don't live very long. And if you don't let them self-seed, then your garden sort of dissipate into a very boring mix or into a very sad looking mess. And again, the artist gardener. So this is all the same garden kind of evolving through, this is probably year 2. This image helps express sort of that mix that we allow plants to mix and mash together. You've got on the bottom left Achillea crismifolia, and that did a brilliant job of blending through the spaces underneath all the plants. The problem with Achillea crismifolia is if you don't give it a good hard chop back early in the year when it's flowering, it can get a bit ropey and look a bit sad if it's in too good a soil conditions. So in Capitoul, where I showed you the first site where there's only gravel, at the moment Achillea crismifolia grows 2 or 3 centimeters off the ground and spreads like a winner. In this garden, because it's actually lots of potential because the soil is better, it grows to 30-40 centimeters, and if you don't chop it back late spring, it kind of flops and looks really dreadfully messy. So as a plant for a successful ground cover, potentially it was a huge fail because the gardeners have to put a lot of time and effort into it. But fortunately, the gardeners are putting that time and effort into it, so it's working really well. And they understood and they taught us how to manage that plant. Self-seeding, this is Sideritis, and the Sideritis is popping up everywhere in this gravel. And it's the gardener's choice which plants to leave, which plants to remove. And maybe the path direction changes because they allow the plants to die out in one area, and that becomes a new path. And then the empty space, that potential of emptiness, becomes full of vegetation. And I would celebrate that. So this is that garden again. So also we use lots of different species because some things don't work and some things do, and it allows for nature to help us. If you plant big swathes of one vegetation and it doesn't survive, it's really obvious that you made a mistake. If you plant a massive diversity of vegetation across a landscape, the winners survive and hopefully look wonderful. Another garden, this garden is in Gord, so sort of a bit further up, a bit drier, and the client met us at Chelsea. For those of you starting up, show gardens are fake. It's like putting on a dog show, and we're basically entertainers, but it does help you get your name out there. We're a very small practice. We get to work all over the world because we did show gardens and we got our name out there. And the real risk is you get publicly told that what you did was rubbish, and that's not very nice. But if you are brave enough, I think it's really rewarding and it really helps you progress. But it does take a bit of courage because you are publicly potentially shaming yourself if it doesn't work as you wanted it. And we've made about 20 gardens probably, and I would say probably 5 of them we're super proud of, 10 of them we're pretty proud of, and then 10 or 15, 5 of them were so-so. But you can't win them all, and you have to go and have a go. And our last one was a disaster. So you never stop learning, and I think that's a good thing to do. So we kind of blend we have lots of pools put in our landscapes, and so we try and make them fit as well as possible into landscape. This is sort of July, so this is vegetation which is just going off, and that for us is important. This is the sort of star plant is Lomelosa in the front there. Lomelosa we love because its seed heads kind of stay hazy and starry all summer. Another garden, this is in Saint-Rémy de Provence. Here we use the story of water, the agricultural water pattern through the landscape. There's these massive raised canals that come from La Durance and bring water to all the different areas, all the fields of Provence, mostly for orchards. And so we used that line, that character of landscape as our kind of message, underlying story to our garden. For us, the presence of water is very important to a garden. It brings kind of this sense of wealth, sense of life to a landscape, but we don't want it to be the thing which brings life to the plants. We want the plants to have the natural water cycle feeding them, so that in the summer when everything is brown and dry around, our garden's also brown and dry. But potentially there is this source of water, this point in the landscape where water is welling, pouring, streaming, something which makes the garden feel kind of joyous, and even more so when a garden is looking dry. There's this great contrast between kind of the joy of running water and kind of that energy against this drying landscape. But we also try and work with the flow of water. So in the summer, water should slow down. In the winter, it should speed up. So we have the kind of variable pump systems that allow our water courses to change speed, to change energy throughout the year. Another garden, another pool. This garden is in Antibes, so more Côte d'Azur, very near the sea. Working with sort of a staggered paved area. And again, you can see Lombolosa in there. And you can see again, on the higher side of the photo, this sort of grassy landscapes and this kind of shrubby landscapes. So it's kind of repeated pattern that we use a lot in our work. This is a planting in the same garden that we've probably been working on now for 10 years, and through Ali, and we've had a brilliant artist gardener called Alex Doodley, and now Kevin Reed's working on it. And we've been really lucky to attract some brilliant gardeners. And so this planting has changed tenfold in 10 years. And that is the joy of it. Right. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you have appreciated my quite messy and risk-taking process. I think gardens are all about taking risks. I really have enjoyed working in a landscape which is constantly changing, and that risk-taking has allowed us to learn very fast, and the feedback loop of our artist gardeners and this practice of maintaining what we make has really helped us learn. Thank you very much. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I just had to get permission to speak. So I guess this is the point that we'd all give James a round of applause. But what we used to do at the kids' school is we'd just go like that, so that everyone can kind of see that you're getting a massive round of applause there from everyone. That was fantastic, James, and it was really cool to see the participants just kept going up through the evening and didn't go down until I started.
Okay, very good. That's good. No one left. That's nice.
Yeah. So we really welcome people to bring questions. We've already got some here, but if any of you have any other questions, we're more than happy to have them added at this point as well. One of the first questions, James, was from Penny Clifford. She was wanting to know, what is the pH of the crushed rock? This is early in your talk, so
yeah, it's about 8, pH 8, so very alkaline. But most of the vegetation we work with is lime tolerant or lime loving. We use some acid loving plants, but we generally go in a direction. Most of the landscapes we work in are very high in lime.
Cool. We've also got one that is just wanting to know, how do your also from Penny actually, like, what do your clients generally feel about you suggesting that they set their gardens on fire? She kind of said it a little bit more practically than that, but
yeah. Sadly, we have never let any of our gardens burn. Yeah. In the Mediterranean, it's such a volatile and closely built landscape that generally you're not allowed to do any burning. I'd like to get to it though, Penny. I think it'd be really exciting, and of course we could do it in the winter and burn our landscapes. I would relish the chance. I'm sad also these gardens take 4 to 5 years to grow, and our clients have been very patient, and then if we burn them, they're going to take another 4 or 5 years to grow. If they really enjoy the process of change, then I would welcome the chance to talk to them.
Yeah. Sort of quite a practical, because you're talking to a room full of professionals, or many rooms full of professionals. They were just about how you charge clients for that ongoing service. Is that something that you put forward in a proposal forward, or is it an ongoing rate? Or
yeah, so we can't charge enough.
No,
because we want to be there more, and we can't afford to be there more. So in the end, it's like it's about 6 visits a year. Ali runs them, and he goes 4 times a year as a consultant, but he's constantly involved with the artist gardener, whoever's maintaining the garden. And then 2 days a year he spends working with the gardener, learning from them and teaching them other practices that we've learned in other gardens. And so it's about six visits a year, which isn't enough. But at some point, we're obviously potentially more expensive than the gardener, and therefore they can't be paying us to consult more than they're paying the gardener. So at some point, there's a balance to be made.
Yeah. So that's something that they know, that 6 visits a year. And do they sign that in as you sort of say for 10 years you're involved? Is that like, if you want a garden from me, you're in a 10-year contract, or is it?
Yeah, I like that ballsy approach, Santi. But in the end, we suggest it. We say, and actually, I think it's very rare for a garden for clients to say we don't want to do that. As we enter a garden, the fact that we say we want to stay involved with them for 10 years is a huge selling point. They want that. They're like, really, you're gonna, because we don't know each other, and if we get on with them and they want what we do, and we've been through that process of making sure that we're right for them, and we do say no to a fair amount of people because we know we're not right for them because what we do is particular. I think that's a really nice thing to share as well. We have a very strong aesthetic. We know what we want to do, and our aesthetic has grown in a particular direction for the last 20 years because we followed one aesthetic. We're not generic garden designers, and there's nothing wrong with being generic, but our practice is not that. Our practice is very focused. We make what we do, and clients come to us because they like what we do. And of course, that design evolves and changes relative to the desire of the client. We love working with, we're designers and artists. We love working with clients' desire and interest, but we have a strong aesthetic and we follow that. So first we get through that, and then we hopefully get a relationship for 10 years so we can see how it evolves.
Awesome. Another little kind of professional espionage question. What is the left from plan column about?
The left from plan column.
Yeah. So there was sort of like plants planted, percentages, and then this isn't my question, this is Jill's question. Left from plan. I did look carefully at the thing, and it was it looked like maybe things that didn't arrive on site was my idea, or things that were on the plan, or
it may be because we're dealing with big numbers of plants. Sometimes we'll start applying the plants to the landscape, and we've got some left, and that allows us to reintroduce them into other areas. I imagine that's what it is.
Cool. Sounds good.
I'm happy to share my spreadsheet. If anyone wants that, I can share it in an Excel document so they can see how the formulas work, and then they can understand it much better.
Love it. Awesome. Nice question a couple of questions from Andy Hamilton. First, do you combine direct seeding into the ground with your planting schemes, or does the lack of irrigation make germination too fickle?
We don't seed initially into the landscape because it's very hard as the gardens start to understand which seedlings are desired and which seedlings are not desired. We do plant plants that will self-seed. So we generally, instead of planting 10% ferula or fennel, we just plant 1% because we know it's going to self-seed really well, and it's a very easy to read germinating seed, and so we know it's going to come through, and the gardener will understand what's right and what's wrong to weed. But seeding at the moment is something we're starting to look at. We did a prairie garden recently, and we planted maybe 10% of the vegetation, then we seeded the rest. So then we just leave everything to germinate, because the first germination is so hard to understand what's right, what's wrong.
Yeah, totally. And from we're also just getting some people here who are just saying thank you so much for the talk. So I just want to pass that on, because I know you've been talking without seeing everybody's faces. So just to let you know, everybody's going, we love it and thank you. Another question, do you integrate wider ecological mapping into the analysis and design of your landscape? There's a lot of focus here in New Zealand where we are looking at ecological restoration as really central to lots of our practice, and so quite relevant to our work. So I guess I'll leave you to answer that.
Yeah, so it's definitely where we want to go. Do our own soil surveys, understand the varying microclimates within a landscape we're working on. We're working on quite small residential properties, really. So that's a very focused and very kind of, we're spoiling ourselves by doing all that work. We'd love to work on bigger, more public projects where we could really get involved with that, because we really love data.
I thought I'm just going to drop one question in for myself, because a lot of the thought that came into my head a lot of the time when you were talking about the natural landscape, given that this landscape has been kind of used for pasture and horticulture by humans for so long, has anyone really attempted, just thinking about writers like, I know you like George Monbiot, I'm probably saying his name wrong, but people like that have written books like Feral, and who are looking at this kind of construct around, is the burning forest the wild landscape, or what else is there? Is anyone really exploring that in Europe, of the landscape before human, or like, you know, something beyond that pasture wild? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
A sort of unknown wild, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that whole rewilding,
really dehumanized wild.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm that interested in it. Personally, I really love that the moors of the Dartmoor is a human-made landscape, you know, and it's beautiful, that kind of. So I think, I imagine the tropical rainforests of New Zealand are extraordinary and complicated and rich, and apparently in Poland there's still some primal rainforest, which is European in species, but primal rainforest and very beautiful and lush. But I'm into poor and barren and mean, and man's hands often been involved in that, and that landscape is what really inspires me. And I think when it comes to Mediterranean landscapes, fire has not always been man-made. There's a lot of natural made fire as well. So it's a very that kind of pared back, tough, mean landscape is my thing. And so I like the hand of man within landscape.
Cool. Another question from Andy. Do you have many plant mixes that adapt well to significant shade? I'm thinking about the change over the years as trees grow and change, the shade characteristics of these gardens.
Yeah, it's a good question, and in the wild too, or as gardens evolve, they kind of get less and less diverse. So the plant mixes that we use in the shade are all right. They're not as dramatic or as floriferous or as kind of showy as a sunny landscape. But that is the natural state of things. As the forest evolves in the Mediterranean, the diversity goes down, and potentially the drama goes down. And so you have to burn it.
One day we're going to know where there's going to be a fire and we'll be like, no, it's James. It's definitely yeah. From Ian Henderson, we've got a question. If you return to gardens later and they're a disappointment, what do you do as restoration? So
we do lots of replanting. Because at the moment we're using lots of mineral material, we can just weed out a lot and just leave space. That often looks so much better. I mean, a lot of potential disasters we've been having is using too much herbaceous material, and that herbaceous material midsummer looks just like a bad hair day, really messy. And so weeding out and leaving space has been our biggest lesson. You know, we don't have to put so much in the first place, but because I'm obsessed, I do. So pulling out and then replanting. We've got lots of clients who are very happy to put 10% plants back in every other year, and that is a natural process. If everything was self-seeding well and everything was doing really well, then reblending plants in, removing plants as they kind of get to a certain age, and reseeding or replanting small plants is part of our process and part of the joy of gardening. And there's kind of this obsession with planting a garden, and that's it for life. But you know, true gardeners are constantly buying new plants and trying to get them in here and there, and that's what we do for our clients now, and they love it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people do appreciate it when you just say to them, "You're going to keep going."
Yeah,
keep going.
Yeah,
They're
We'll
all
take that
cool.
one out
As
this
long as
year.
they know. That's
Yeah.
what they're getting
Yeah,
into.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question. Somebody is just like, there's been a couple of comments actually about the value that you put on gardeners. And one question is, which I know the answer to, but were you a gardener or interested in gardening practice prior to being involved in design? Or is it the other way around?
Yeah, definitely. I'm growing into being a gardener. I have Xanthi's visited my house, and I have started planting, and every now and then I get the itch to weed or to prune, but it's kind of rare. It's an itch which is growing in me over the years. Looking at landscape has been my absolute life obsession from being a child, and so I've got this really invested amount of time. Like every week I'll be walking at least 2 to 3 hours in a new piece of landscape. As I drive past it, I have to stop and be late so I can look at that piece of landscape. So it's an obsession. And so my real drive is by studying and looking.
Have the recent fires in Southern Europe affected your practice?
Well, La Clap, next to the big project we showed you at the start, that burned 2 months ago. Has it affected my practice? Just by looking and seeing what evolves through fire, and that dynamism post fire of these landscapes, which cistus can be rock roses, cistus. 2,000 plants germinate per square meter. That huge potential energy post fire is extraordinary, and so it's helped us as designers understand that kind of evolution of change. But so far I've not worked in a landscape which has just been burnt and they've asked me to come and do the job, but I would love to be involved.
Cool. Now we're sort of getting to the end of the questions here, so you can go, and I guess it's morning where you are. So one was just more of a comment that they thought that there was way less kind of scrubby, that your gardens are actually way less loose and cray than we were expecting as we went through the talk.
Yeah.
We were like expecting
I was cheating. I think it's my habit as a salesman to seduce, and so I probably put in just the nicest images. I probably should have picked some real disasters to show you maybe next time.
Other garden designers love that sort of stuff. And then just a comment, what are all the people behind you doing?
They're trying to draw a picture. They've been climbing around the street and they're trying to draw a picture of a clock which Xanthi guessed, and it's not in France.
It's Big Ben.
It's Big Ben. Yeah.
It's Big Ben. That now has blue dials things now. And I think this is actually a really nice question to end on, which is from lovely Deb. And she was just wanting to know, can you just please show us the second to last photo again with the really pretty pool? Because it wasn't up for long and it was incredibly stunning, and it would be really nice also to just end on some beautiful work of yours.
Second to last photo.
Second to last photo. It might be third to last. You can kind of drift through, kind of pool, beautiful. I personally love these pavers here, and the lack of levelness of them. I'm not saying your pavings are out. I'm just like, I like the
there you are.
Complex rhythm. And the what is the pebble? What sort of pebble? That's the sort of crushed minerals that you're talking about, or more of a dressing in these?
The mineral cover is always a local quarry, and it's crushed material, always one size. So between 4 and 6 millimeters is the general one we use. This encourages self-seeding, but we put it 10 centimeters deep.
Okay, so really 10 centimeters deep of 4 to 6 mil aggregate local stone.
Which is local, but it's that helps manage the weeding.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. There we go. Now that's a beautiful beautiful picture to end the talk on. Thank you so much, James, for your time with us tonight. It's been a wonderful talk, and I know that it's going to be enjoyed by lots of other people in the society for years to come. And it will be up on YouTube if you ever want to have a look. We will send you a link so that you can keep it as well. But thank you very much for the evening, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I look forward to coming to see you all.
Can't wait.
Yeah.